Russell,
Hello.
are you going to do an intro?
No, I think I'm gonna let you guys take it. Guys, have fun. We're ready for you.
Little River, well, we're going to do it like you saw it on the slide earlier. We're going to do it in three parts. I'm going to do the history. Fred's going to do kind of what's there today in the museum, and Chris is going to talk about modeling and what kind of inspiration that he had for the model, perhaps. Okay, Little River Railroad. It was a logging railroad that existed in the early 20th century. And it was primarily, again, designed for logging, but it also had some tourist attractions in the area. I get the right one. And it was in Tennessee. And what part of Tennessee? In eastern Tennessee, Knoxville area, and actually in the Great Smoky Mountains. So that kind of give you an idea where the Little River Railroad was. This is kind of the route of the Little River. Um, the Southern Railway went under different names, but anyway, it came down from Knoxville, and there was a branch to Maryville, Tennessee. At Maryville, actually at Walland, one of the towns here, there was a tannery set up, and there was no way to get their goods out. And so what happened was they contacted with the Little River Railroad. Uh, Basically, the railroad itself is about 26 miles long. It ran from Walland, just outside of Maryville, Tennessee. The main line, as I call it, I don't know whether they did or not, ended at Elkmont, and there was branches that went up into the mountains. As a matter of fact, if you're familiar with the Smoky Mountains, they went even had branches not to the top, but to the base of Clingman's Dome, which is one of the tallest places in the eastern United States. So they were in very rough terrain through the whole time. Uh, Colonel William B. Townsend, high and low, no one knows where his title of colonel came from. Maybe like, he wasn't even a Kentucky colonel. However, Mr. Townsend was with the Clearfield Lumber Company in Pennsylvania. That also has a Kentucky convention connection. If you know the Moorhead and North Fork Railroad out of Moorhead, Kentucky, but their headquarters was Clearfield, Kentucky. Again, another logging railroad owned by the same outfit. As I said, the tannery invited them to come down, look at the terrain, and figured if it was worth logging, then they would build the railroad. The tannery would get a supply of bark that they needed, and a main way to send their stuff out. I thought it was unusual. The tannery would get hides all the way from South America. I mean, there was a big thing that there were hides, so they needed transportation not only to get the materials in, but to get the materials back out again. Construction started in 1901, and it's a relatively modern era. There was equipment, motorized or steam equipment to actually do the grading. A lot of it was still done by teams of mules and oxen and stuff, but they basically had machinery to go in there and start clearing the ground. First thing they did was they built a sawmill at Townsend, and uh, oddly enough, that's the name that Mr. Townsend gave to the town, is Townsend, Tennessee. There is a town there today, but that was the sawmill where the logs would be brought into. At the end, I said at 26 miles was Elkmont. At Elkmont, they built shops buildings. They had workers buildings. They had they said a hotel, but one just said it was more like a boarding house type thing. But the main thing was the shops and where they worked and fueled on their locomotives. They in the locomotive shops, they could actually tear down and rebuild a locomotive. This particular engine, one we'll talk about later, is number 110, and it was in the shops going through with an overhaul. They also had to rebuild several wrecks. It was a kind of logging railroads were kind of helter-skelter in some respects. A lot of times they'd end up in a ditch or in the ground or upside down or whatever. So they had all the capabilities in the shops to totally rebuild the locomotives. They bought several locomotives. The rod locomotives they used primarily to haul the logs to the mill, uh, mostly from the Elkmont area. They also used them for the excursion trains. They had about three that they actually kept in service. 105 was a prairie type, which is a typical logging locomotive, a 262. You've seen a lot of them. They had a small Pacific, number 110. This is the builder's photo from all their locomotives came from the Baldwin Locomotive Works. This is 110 on the turntable at Baldwin for its photo shoot, so to speak. 110 was, I think, sort of the glamour girl of the operation. It was used not, it wasn't solely used in the excursions, and it also did pull logs, pull its freight cars. But in this particular picture, it has Mrs. Townsend's private car on the back of the train, and as she was going to go maybe a shopping trip in Knoxville or something like that. It was a business car, but what I can understand, Mrs. Townsend used it more than anyone. They bought a Malley locomotive number 126. They had a problem. They had two or three locomotives that they bought and then had to return to the builder. Primarily clearance problems. You thought they'd measured all this beforehand, but I have a feeling the clearance in the curves was one of the biggest problems. Also, 126 had a tendency to go on the ground. So they returned it, and they had returned an earlier rod locomotive back to Baldwin also because they just wouldn't stay on the track. This particular engine was sold to logging operations in the Pacific Northwest. And this is a picture taken after several, when it was wrecked. And that Fred's going to talk a little bit more about this locomotive later in the program. So they replaced it with probably one of the smallest, if not smallest, Malley locomotives built, number 148. And 148 was also used to pull passenger trains for them or excursion trains. It was used to pull the logging trains back to the mill. And after the war, after the railroad shut down, it spent World War II at Alcoa, Tennessee, as a plant switcher. So it was scrapped after World War II. The working engines, as I want to call them, were Shea locomotives. All of them obviously were built by Lima. They had over, what I could count, over the operation, they had 10 Shays. The first 5 Shays were wrecked and scrapped over a period. Some of them were rebuilt, scrapped again, and then wrecked again, and then scrapped. But they ended up with roughly around 5 Shays towards the end. This is a close-up of one of their Shay locomotives. This is taken at Elkmont. You can see it was a Shay with a tender, water tender on the back. The coaling operation was pretty simple. There was a log loader up on a ridge on a track being used as a coal loader. And that was what they would coal the engines with. And you can see, looking close, you can see a Shay in the background, and the Shay that they're loading is on the other side, hidden by this one. You can't see it. An idea of the trees. This was kind of before chainsaws.
Yeah.
So they had the gangs that would come out and saw the trees down. They logged out 3 different kinds of trees. Black cherry, hemlock, and tulip poplar. The hemlock trees were used for the tannery. They were sort of a trash tree in a way, but they were perfect for the tannery. The other trees were primarily used for furniture making, either interior of the furniture or the outside of the furniture, depending on the particular tree. They could also be used for framing, but they weren't construction lumber. They were mostly cabinet making type lumber is what they sold. And you can see another tree there, a stump of a tree that was just recently cut before this picture was taken. The track was set a little rough and ready on the track. This is a picture of obviously a Shay operating on the track. Like a lot of logging railroads, predominantly going uphill. They put the locomotive on the downhill side in case the brakes failed on the cars or something like that. They wouldn't have a runaway. If you the other way around, if a coupler broke, who knows where that car would end up at? Yes, sir.
From that picture, it looks like that's a regular gauge railroad,
A what?
a regular.
Standard gauge?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good question. The whole railroad was standard gauge, 4 foot, 8.5 inch gauge, because they needed to interchange with the Southern. That's part of the reason why they did that. But this is temporary track. The track would be run into a logging area. When they logged that area out, they take the track up and move it somewhere else. And that, like I said, they had a lot of wrecks. A lot of times the trains would go off upside down. They'd rebuild them, put them back in shape again. We're talking about the shays. They didn't have any wrecks with the rod engines, but they did with the shays. This is a log loading operation. You can see the log loader is mounted on a flat car, and it rolled. It was self-propelled. There was rails on the flat car, and they could move back and forth on the flat car. And I'm pretty sure that even in the lax safety things of the day, I don't think they normally had people riding up and down on the logs. It's obviously a photo, but you can see that it's hard work. You see the one man is holding a logging pick or pike to move the logs around with. And these were the typical flat cars that they used. This is 126 is no 148. 148 is the one. I've never figured out their numbering system.
I don't think there was one.
Well, there had to be something, because I showed you earlier engine number 105. They said Baldwin in their photo misnumbered it as 103. How would you know? I mean, that was how would you know? But anyway, they did that. So there it is. And this was the only iron bridge or steel bridge on the railroad. And the rest of them were all timber structures that they had. Getting back to Townsend, there they would shove the logs off. You can kind of see the size of some of the logs compared to the guys that are standing on top of them. And they would skid those logs off into the mill pond. And the mill pond is where they would be collected at. Then they would go into the mill where they would be sawed up into the boards that they needed. This is the third mill. The other two burned down. You can imagine, well, for one thing, the tall structure there is where they burned off the sawdust. So, it was steam powered. So there was lots of opportunity, I guess, for something to go wrong. But the first two mills did burn down. I mentioned it was a tourist railroad also. It wasn't their main thing, but there they were in the Great Smoky Mountains, and their people would want to go visit. So they had sort of a business there. And these are brochures advertising all the things that you can do. The Knoxville and Augusta was a Southern Railway. It was a Southern Railway predecessor, so to speak. And so the Little River, you could travel there. This is a map that kind of gives you an idea. If you were going to take a Sunday excursion on the Little River Railroad, you would probably board a Southern train at Maryville or Knoxville. In fact, you may board a special excursion train. I never quite figured that out, but I'm pretty sure some of them were special trains. It would get to Maryville, cross to Walland, and at that point, a Little River locomotive would couple onto the train. And from then on, you would go to Elkmont. Tremont down there at the bottom was pretty much a logging operation. I believe there also was a camp of some sort at Tremont. This is 148 with a photo shoot. Everybody's out getting their picture taken. And I doubt if anybody could have heard anything, because it's also the safety valves blowing off steam at the same time in this picture. So, but anyway, that's the photo shoot. You get an idea what an excursion train could look like. not to be outdone, they also had the observation car. This was built on a flat car by the Little River Railroad, and it was named Elkmont. And I've seen all these guys, it was all guys on here apparently, and most of them have on white shirts. I can't imagine how white those shirts would have been riding behind in front of a Shea locomotive belching out coal soot all the way. But anyway, the Elkmont was a lot of times connected onto the excursion trains once at Walland and then taken on back. Wonderland Park, it sounds like an amusement park. It wasn't. It was a hotel. There were several hotels. There was a place called Kinsey Springs. Uh, there was Wonderland Park. Not a great picture, but there's a picture of the hotel itself up on the hill. And if you look down, you can see where the shelter was, where you got off the train. They had a roadway off to the side to take your baggage up to the top. And I'm presuming if you needed it, you could have a carriage or something that would take you to the top of the hill. This is the end of track at Elkmont. Beyond Elkmont and around Elkmont, there were cabins that you could rent. There was, I believe, a hotel there, and it was actually a club, the Elkmont Club, and then eventually it became a tourist hotel. This is also where they had the great hotel that they said was mostly a boarding house, and that was for the workers. And that. As the railroad business fell off, they kept a car coming there, and what they did was, this is a Studebaker bus that they modified in the shops at the Little River Railroad and added the flange wheels and the front rear wheels to it. The last load of logs, I should say. It was either late part of 1938 or early part of 1939. They brought in the last train of logs to Townsend. They unloaded the logs, and basically the railroad shut down. But now they had a whole log pond full of logs to go through. So the mill kept on working even though the log cutting had shut down. What had happened was the Little River Railroad around 1926 had sold 100,000 acres to the state of Tennessee, but they kept the rights for the next 15 years to log on it. This 100,000 acres was eventually what was going to become the park. But anyway, right at that point, it was still belonged to the state of Tennessee. They came into the mill, and they saved 3 logs to be the last logs to go through the mill. And that was at 2 p.m. on 5th of July, 1939. There was 3 logs, a hemlock, a black cherry, and a tulip poplar. Okay, they sent the other 2 logs through. The last log is the tulip poplar. The man in the white coat, white shirt there, without the tie, leaning against it, he was more or less like their superintendent for almost all the years, starting as a young guy fresh out of college, as all the years that they operated. What they did was, at 2 p.m., they ran the last log through the mill. Once that finished, they killed the fires, tied the whistle down. The whistle blew continuously until the mill ran out of steam. And that was the end of the Little River Railroad, the Little River Logging Company. So Fred's going to.
Thank you.
But things just didn't end there. We know that.
It didn't end there.
Let me get out of here.
Most railroads leave bits and pieces here and there. And through our travels, Barbara and I have stumbled into a few of these things. A couple of years ago, we went down to Great Smoky Mountains to celebrate our anniversary. And while we were tooling around there, we just happened upon the Railroad Museum. It was not planned. It was not, sweetie, it was not planned, I swear. Okay.
Let you sleep at night, Fred.
But it just happened to be there. But most of us have been down in the Great Smoky Mountains. You know what it's like. It was a great week that we spent down there celebrating our anniversary. And honestly, this just appeared on one road on the way out of the park. And where is this, Bob?
Well, it's a Townsend.
It's a Townsend. You've heard Bob talking all about Townsend. So this is where most of the remnants of the railroad exist. Not all of them. Go to Great Smoky Mountains, do a detour, and spend a couple hours in this museum. It's not fancy. It's not awesome. It's free. Put some money in the donation box so they continue their mission down there of working this thing. So there's a couple of brochures there that talk about the museum itself. There's a train depot and a post office. And as you read through this, you can see that the depot is the original Wallen Depot, which was at the junction of Little River and Southern Railroads. Bob talked about the interchange earlier, and then talks about some other things in there as well. The post office, not. The post office, which is adjacent to the depot, is a replica of the post office that was in Elkmont. So the depot was moved in, the post office is a replica, and the post office is actually the gift shop and that sort of thing. We did pick up a couple of things there because, that's what we do. So what do I want to do? Go on, and move there. Okay, so this is the depot. Okay, obviously not originally there, but it is. And that's where all the displays are located. There are some things outside, but if you want to read about the history, everything's tagged, well documented. The person on staff probably is just a gift shop manager, but she's willing to say, let me call the guy who knows. And she will call him and he put you on the phone, and then your hour to 2 hours becomes half a day. So be careful with what you ask for. But there's a lot of displays in here. A lot of the pictures that Bob showed you are up in here, and they've got even more detailed information than what Bob talked about. Again, tourism was a large part of the railroad in the last part of it. So a lot of you guys know that I am just intrigued by rail cars. Okay, not freight cars, not gondolas, but rail cars like rail buses and RDCs and so forth. They had a lot of different stuff. It really, the bus was nothing compared to a lot of the stuff. The Tin Lizzie up there was wild. A lot of the documentation here, rail passes for other railroads. There you go, some details there. And this is what you find on all this stuff in there, a little explanation. So it's not like, well, there's some stuff, go look and good luck with it. Obviously, they're going to talk about the timber industry. That's the whole reason for the existence of the railroad to begin with. And a map very similar to what we showed earlier that shows where things are, but it's, big scale. So it's kind of neat to see that. And as I said, there's a gift shop there. And if that's not enough, there's some outside stuff as well. So one of the log loaders there that's in really, really, really sad shape. Of course, none of this is going to work ever again anyway. And then this Shea locomotive that did operate on the railroad, okay? It is only cosmetically restored, and it will never, ever run again. Too many missing parts and so on and so forth. But it's kind of cool to see it out there, and it looks pretty neat. And no restrictions. You can climb up in the cab. Just don't be crazy and jump off the back, Chris, okay? All right. There are a couple of other pieces of equipment also outside this flat car that supposedly ran on the railroad. No markings on it or anything. Don't know. There's also some equipment inside, not the white shed there, but the kind of olive colored shed behind. It was all locked up the day we were there. She offered to call the guy. No, thank you anyway. I don't need to go look inside. It's fine. We'll be back some other time, and we'll spend some time, arrange a visit to go down there and actually spend some time. But there's more inside. This is kind of neat. This is a little business card they have. It's kind of neat. Bob talked about 110. Y'all remember Bob talking about 110? For those of you who are still awake at that point? Absolutely. 110 still exists. It runs on the Little River Railroad. The Little River Railroad in Coldwater, Michigan. It is the locomotive that Bob showed you earlier. They named this railroad that they created up in Michigan after the Little River because that was the locomotive that started this tourist line up in Michigan. I think that's so cool. Okay. I've seen this thing and I did not make the connection at the time. Silly me, I would have taken a whole lot more pictures up there, but there it is. Okay. Remember this one? The Malley? Remember the Malley? And Bob showed what kind of bad condition it was and so forth. And this was in the 80s, I think, when that picture was taken. It was affectionately called Skookum. Okay? Skookum has had an interesting travels in its days. Made in at the Baldwin factory, went to the Little River, back to Baldwin. As Bob said, they returned it. Okay. Went out to the West Coast. Remember, Bob said it went out to the West Coast. Oh my goodness, look at all the places it went out west. All those different places. 1920, 24, 30, 31, 33. Holy moly, it went all over the place. And it just kept going and going. 1960, Puget Sound. This is when it was sold to a private individual who said, I can fix that. Well, you saw the picture in 1980, okay? In 2004, it went to Chris Baldo on the Oregon Coast Scenic Railway. What locomotive is also at the Oregon Coast Scenic Railway? McLeod 25. That's the one that Barbara and I rode on that she freaked out because she was sitting in the tender and I was all over the cab. Okay. As we were going down the track, she's, you're going to find it. Nah, it was fine. I lived to talk about it. Why did it go there? Well, to get fixed. Now it resides at the Niles Canyon Railway, which is in the East Bay, San Francisco, East Bay, up in the hills there. Okay. And that's what she looks like today. Holy moly. Really? Yeah, a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of cash went into that. But that's what she looks like today. And she has run excursions on the Niles Canyon River Railway. Ran a couple excursions way back out in Oregon as well. But yeah, from what he showed you to this. I like mine better than yours.
Yeah, just a little bit. Not as much mud on it.
So once you found out all that information, you're maybe thinking, I might be able to model this thing. Or a part of it.
Or just a kind of a stylized version of it. So my wife and I love the Smoky Mountains. We've gone down there and hiked miles and miles of trails, and including Tremont and Elkmont, and we've been to the museum at Townsend. And at the time, I was not aware that a railroad had operated in the Smoky Mountains, but we're on the trail. If you've ever been on the trail to Elkmont, the thing that struck me about the trail is that this seems awfully wide, and there's an obvious cut on one side, as on the hillside, and the grade is very gradual. And I kept thinking to myself, this feels like a right of way, just putting the pieces together. And come to find out, it was. In fact, a lot of the roads and trails in the Smokies are on the old right-of-way for the railroad. And at the Sugar Lands Visitor Center, just outside of Gatlinburg, they have some photos in frames, and they'll show, there's one that I remember clearly. There's a huge rock, and the track is coming around and has the locomotive, and then it shows a modern photo where it's paved road and the car's coming around that same curve. So that was interesting. So I did a little research and found some books and started reading. And then on subsequent trips, we went back down and hiked those same trails, but with a different eye toward it, and looking at it through the lens of this used to be a railroad. And I've always been fascinated with Shay locomotives. I've always wanted to build a fall themed layout, and the idea of building a micro layout, I guess you could say. This layout was 4 feet long and just 12 inches deep. Oh, thank you. So that's how it all came together. So I got to run my Atlas Shay, and I got to build a logging layout and do a fall themed. And once I discovered the existence or prior existence of the Little River Lumber Company, now I have my prototype. So this on the layout is my representation of Elkmont. And I don't know if you remember one of Bob's photos, but it showed a lot of the company houses along the rails. There is a company store here in the far left, and the log loader. I mean, this is just kind of the what do you call it? Artistic license, compression of what Tremont could have looked like. And there's also a steam donkey there that operates the log loader. Doesn't show up real well in the photos, but all the rigging is there. I can't think of the name of the company that makes the kit, but that is a logging camp kit. So each one of those had to be built, and then yeah, and it is in scale. I heard someone say that. So yeah, this is an in scale layout. And now the Shay is I think a Class B Shay, so it's 2-truck, not a 3-truck Shay. But that's what I had to work with. And instead of flat cars, I use some little log bunk cars. They do have the rails on them, like the flat cars did. But those are built from pewter kits. And I added a few details like the brake wheels and chains to hold the logs on and whatnot. And as it goes down the hill, it goes over a timber bridge. And by the way, the track plan is based, I don't know if you'll probably remember the old gum stump and snowshoe track plan. It was probably published, what, in the 50s or 60s, I guess. So it's a slightly modified version of that track plan. So this is where it switches back and doubles back over itself.
So is that bridge a scratch built?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just timbers and built it to fit the spot.
Okay, I know it was a silly question, but.
Yeah, trying to find a timber bridge to fit that spot was going to be a little tough. I tried to adapt a kit, and it ended up just being a scratch built bridge. So. And so from some of our hikes I think this was up toward Elkmont. I forget what it's called, but it's a stack of rocks that is a marker saying, hey, there's something here.
Right.
And I saw that and I thought, okay, we're going to walk off into the woods off the trail for a little bit, and probably 50 or 70 feet off the trail, this is what I find. I found the hulk of an old car, probably a Model T, I'm guessing, just by the shape.
It was just posted.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay. And there were several buckets there. I don't know if I included a picture of that or not, but no, there were some buckets there. One was like an enamel coated bucket, and the bottom had obviously rusted out, and a little tree was growing up through the middle of it. Just some random artifacts like that. And then another location, there's a grist mill, used to be a grist mill along that line, and I found a section of rail up near where that was, and I think the chimney was still standing from that grist mill. So there's artifacts still to be found along the trail up there, which just, it's fascinating because you look around and it's just hard to imagine that being a railroad operation from so far back. Yeah. And so when I modeled it, I had to include a rusted out hulk of a old car on the railroad as a nod to our discovery on the trail. And if anyone's interested, the trees are all handmade. You've probably heard of Scenic Express. They have some natural tree armatures, and I selected some different colors of fall foliage. So they're all made using Scenic Express products. And they also have what they call leaf litter, which provided the leaves that you see in the woods. And then I used static grass wherever I needed static grass or grass to be modeled. And okay, there's the bucket I was telling you about. That was found in the same area as the car. And then there's a few locations where you'll find some old chimneys like this and fireplaces where whatever was built around it is long gone. But some of the chimneys still remain. And so all of this kind of played into my fascination with building this little layout.
It does look like poison.
Yeah.
I'm assuming.
Well, that is poison ivy by the bucket. All right, so, and here's a couple more scenes after switching back and running down the hill under the bridge. It comes back, and then the trail on the upper left photo, the track going off to the right takes you into this lower scene where it rolls into what I call Townsend, because that's where the sawmill is. And there's my little sawmill. Obviously not the huge operation that was actually in Townsend, but again, this is a 1 foot by 4 foot in scale layout. The that's the kit. You might recognize it. It was built from a kit, and it's called Lucas Sawmill. But the footprint of the sawmill was too wide for the space I had available. So, you know, these kits are Craftsman kits, and when I say kit, I mean it's a set of plans and a box of sticks.
Right.
So, so take that with a grain of salt. So I was able to modify the plans, doing a little photo editing on my computer. I scanned it in and did some photo editing and reduced its footprint. I kept the length, but the width is narrower, to fit the space I had available, and then built it, according to that new set of plans. And this is the one modification I made to the track plan. So the original gum stump and snowshoe track plan was actually intended for 2 locomotives to operate. If I had this to do over again, I would have kept with that original plan. I think I really missed out on an opportunity, but I wasn't thinking along those lines when I built it. So there is a runaround track here. So once the log loads are brought in, I can restage it with empties and then run around the train and take it back up to Elkmont. And the roof is actually removable because there is actually a sawmill inside the building. One of the photos I saw in one of the books, it showed a Southern boxcar on the property. So I do have a short interchange track, where the railroad can interchange with the Southern, except at Townsend and not Walland. And that's to get supplies up to the company store at Elkmont. And
That's it.
that's it.
That's awesome. Very nice. Thanks, everybody. Well done.
Thanks, guys. It was a fun
Thanks, that's all.
presentation.